we can't imagine San Francisco without an India Basin or without a tunnel tops. And they're like, we could use more of those in other places. And they hopefully inspire us to do them throughout. And really having a vision for how this goes beyond just building something that's going to be for just that group of people. In the case of tunnel tops, that has been the case. Because we wanted people to come in from the people that weren't normally coming to the Presidio. We wanted to bring people from all the different neighborhoods that weren't excited to be there, and I think we're starting to see that is a destination place. I think the years ahead will be interesting to see what else we can do.
So thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. Thanks for joining us here at the Commonwealth Club World Affairs. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I'm the director of the Center for Biodiversity and Community Science at the California Academy of Sciences. This evening, we're all here today as part of a series of events, 3 deep dives into opportunities for San Francisco in the constantly changing and sometimes turbulent times we live in. The Commonwealth Club World Affairs has put on this series called the What's Good SF, and that series has been generously supported by Levi Strauss & Company. Tonight, we're focusing on how leaders, like the folks I'm sitting with tonight, are elevating nature in San Francisco and supporting our environment today, as well as exploring ways partners across the city are hoping to boost this further, all with the goal of creating a thriving, biodiverse, and sustainable urban ecosystem in the face of climate change, economic challenges, and more. All right, so let's get going. It's my pleasure to share the stage and introduce this great panel of folks tonight. So joining me are Phil Ginsberg, the general manager at San Francisco Recreation and Parks Department. Welcome, Phil. We can have applause for every, we have individual applause. They're awesome enough for that. Jackie Bryant, who's the executive director at the A. Philip Randolph Institute in San Francisco. Lou Stringer, who's the Associate Director of Natural Resources at the Presidio Trust. And last but not least, Amber Hasselbring, who's the Executive Director at Nature in the City.
Yay, Amber.
All right, so I'm gonna start. I wanted to make sure that we have a chance to not only talk about all of our visions and the work that we're doing in this space, but also to help get to know each other and learn what motivates us to do all this work. Like, what brings all of us to the work that we do? So this is a question that I'm gonna ask everyone. Maybe I'll start with Amber. So what motivates you to do the work you do? Like, what makes you care, or why do you care so much about nature in our city?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the people that love nature are my favorite part of nature in the city. I love just being out in wild open spaces and you know, getting inspired by plants or butterflies or the interactions and the running water, but really being around the people that are out there every day taking care of plants and working in their gardens or coming along on our nature walks. They're really passionate, inspired, generous, and you know, they just show up for just about everything. So yeah, I think the people are really it.
Awesome. And we're gonna ask everyone this question, but I encourage you to think about this question about yourself. Like, all of you are here too because you care about nature, and sometimes really asking this question and thinking about how you would answer it is really like good exercise. I thought about it on my way here, and we don't often stop and think about this particular question. So Lou, how about you?
Well, for me, it's that feeling that I get when I've been sitting at my desk or in a meeting all day, and I just don't feel right after that. And if I spend like an hour outside, that feeling is gone. And it's like, oh, why did I just do all that? Why am I doing this? So being in nature is like, I'm doing it so I can be in nature. I don't know how that works out, but it's the spirit of that we all need, the energy that we get from interacting and being outside and participating. And for me, what I do is try to bring nature back. And so the added benefit of being outside is that we to make it more nature filled. So that's the added bonus.
Awesome. How about you, Jackie?
It's amazing how we have very similar feelings that we get, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it either, but I think it's that restorative nature, that connection that you have to open space and fresh air that is extremely important to me. And just, how it feels when you're in the hustle and bustle, to be able to take a moment to have that restorative nature is really important. But I think what really draws me to open spaces in nature are the memories that I remember having with my parents and my children. And I think a part of that restorative nature comes from how it felt to be there at that time. And every time you go out, it just reminds you of that. And I love that about being outside in nature and connecting with open spaces.
Yeah, I love that. How about you, Phil?
All the good answers are taken.
I know, I'm sorry.
Well, first of all, we may live in the most naturally beautiful city in the world. So let's start there.
Yeah.
And I think we all have a responsibility in our very own ways, whether they be the careers that we have or the way we live our lives, to to steward this incredible place. We didn't inherit it. We're borrowing, from our ancestors. We're borrowing it from our children. Secondly, as beautiful as it is, it's also incredibly dense. And that's a good thing, right? Like, true environmentalism, in my view, is enhancing urban density. We want people living in cities. So then the question is, how do you make cities more livable? And the answer is, in part, through nature. And that gets to my personal story or personal feelings that you gave us homework. I did it. And nature has always made me feel peaceful and happy and connected to something larger than myself, which is very much about what parks are generally. Parks are about place, and place means, connecting the past to the present and the present to the future. And when you're in natural places that have been around way longer than you or your parents or your grandparents, it is very, it's very humbling, and it connects you to something larger than yourself.
Yeah, I think I agree so much with what all of you said. I think one of the things I especially think about when we're in the city is like that juxtaposition, right? That you're in the city, or you're like walking in the concrete. There's like a big building. There's, everyone's going to work, or all this stuff is happening in the city. And that's one of the reasons I think many of us live in the city. We love that. And you turn a corner and you see a butterfly, and you're like, that you can have both of those things in the city is amazing. And then you think about all the people who have fought to keep those green spaces and those open spaces. And it's almost like a miracle, right? That we have these moments and these places of nature, these places of recreation and solace, and returning to memories, all of those things. Like, it's been a big fight for a lot of people for many years. And so it's like the joy, and then it's the recognition that people have been fighting for this for so long. That's one of the things I love about all the work that you all do and all the stories that you just shared. So this next question is also for everyone. So as we think about the future of San Francisco and what that might bring, where do biodiversity and access to nature fit? Where does it fit in to that vision? And how can we think about nature and all of the benefits it brings to the city and its people? You all talked about this a little bit in what motivates you, but what do you think of that? How do you think about it in the future? Maybe we'll go reverse. Phil, you can go first. So not all the good answers are taken.
Yeah, but now I have to come up with something.
Yeah, now you don't have time.
Well, I mean, let's start with biodiversity, and I think sort of like society's general awareness about the impacts of climate change, the importance of biodiversity is no longer some sort of kind of, theory by those of us who are, most deeply sort of attached or interested in the environment. Biodiversity is a real thing. For our city to thrive, it has to, and for the flora and fauna to survive in the city, we have to promote an environment where our native species can thrive. It's very simple. And that enables people to be connected to nature, because without biodiversity, you can make the argument that there really would be no nature. And the thing that I'm most passionate about the access question is kids, and making sure that all of our children, they are entitled as a matter of right to a true nature-based experience every day. And, some of us some kids are born into privilege and have the ability to travel to nature. And that's wonderful, and everybody should have the opportunity to do that. But it is equally important that nature exists right here in the city where kids are growing up, that they can smell, touch, learn, and feel.
All right, Jackie, how about you?
Absolutely. I think biodiversity is really integrated in everything you think of when you think about a healthy community. You have access to different spaces. You can appreciate these things. And as Phil was saying, there's a lot of folks that might have access to these places, but I work in communities where that access isn't always readily available. And for many generations, we didn't even think about it as a place where you could enjoy a space. But it's so important because when you're able to see things that you don't notice in your own neighborhood. For example, you get to see hummingbirds come into spaces that didn't used to come into, or the water life that is coming in. It's so important to making sure that, again, you're a thriving, healthy community. And these are visual indicators that your community is healthy. And for, again, working in communities where that has been not necessarily what our experience was growing up, and to see transition and see changes in communities today, it's so important. And it's very vital in making sure that, everything that's in that ecosystem is healthy.
Awesome. How about you, Lou?
I'd say that, if you asked about what does it look like down the road in San Francisco 50 years from now? And I think about all of the spaces that are still available. There is nature in them, but it's often a kind of a weird nature where things have come from Australia and mixed with somewhere else, and they've just kind of put a tangle in a place that no one has access to, and they don't want to go in there. I feel like there's that, and that's nature, right? I mean, that's really nature. There is also a role for people to play in kind of shaping nature. And so what I am excited about, and what I think we're all involved with, is that ability to interact with nature and to change nature in a way that makes it possible for us to feel connected to it, to learn about it, and to kind of move it in a direction that supports more organisms and it supports us. So it supports our ability to feel like we're connected to the place where we live. And so many of us walk through town without any kind of recognition of these little interstitial spaces that are all over the place. That's where the future is. There's a lot of connective tissue that we can, over the next 50 years, regenerate and connect to.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. I once told someone, we were thinking about like, what could you do in San Francisco? And I was like, it's all about the interstitial spaces, right? Like that's the next place. There are big places for sure, and we'll talk about some of those. But this interstitial space, the space between the places that we all spend our time, like transiting or walking, or like that's an amazing opportunity. And we'll talk hopefully a little bit more about that. Amber.
I think what's really interesting about our future is that we could think about ways to get people out more. We could get more volunteering happening. We could have like, I'm really inspired by the Reimagining SF work of like 40 plus agencies with somewhat similar mission overlap to have a sense that we can all find a place, or if it's a physical like part of the city that we steward or care for, or if it's a specialty that we bring forward or something that we've found that we're really good at. And then find a way to, it takes time to build movements. It takes time to really build a healthy collaboration. And that's what we're finding with Reimagining SF. But to think about how all of these places and people could play a role, like what happened with the spontaneous creation of the 2 crosstown trails across the city, what we've done in the Green Hair Street corridor over 17 years, just to think about how, with these little spaces, little medians, little planter boxes, because insects are small and birds are small. They don't care if it's public or private property. They don't care which land manager owns it or cares for it. So I really think about, when we think about access, we can think about the street weeds, the trees growing out of the sidewalk, and think about how we can move that into more native biodiverse habitat, because we all have the tools for that. And nature is really abundant with the seeds it provides, and the way that we can figure out how to put those things to work with our passions and inspiration. So I'm excited to see us get out there and do more together.
Awesome. So I think, we all on this stage and most of us here think a lot about nature and the way that nature and access to nature can help, really help solve some of the biggest problems of our time. But for a lot of people, that isn't the case, right? There's a lot of perceived competition between like the biggest and most pressing issues of our time. And sometimes thinking about nature or biodiversity kind of takes a back seat to some of those issues that seem more critical. And sometimes it's framed as like an either or question. And so maybe we'll ask you, Phil, with your city hat on, there are a lot of things that our city has to balance, a lot of priorities. I know you advocate for nature and open space a lot of times in your job, but how do you position, and how do we all think about positioning nature and these visions that we just talked about? How do we like advocate for that in the face of some things that seem kind of much bigger?
The point is a great one. So often in park battles where, I have 880,000 bosses and they're all loving their parks loudly and everybody has their own, sort of point of view. It's nature versus soccer fields or this versus that. And what we need to understand, it's not nature versus, it's and, not or. It's people and nature and people. People are in nature, nature is our people, right? And so we have to think about these things in a much more integrated way and in a much less polarized way. I think the biggest challenge we have in that regard is that, in all honesty, sort of politics and government, they're very short-term, sort of instant, people are looking for sort of instant gratification. And if we could all take a second and understand that parks and nature are upstream front-end solutions to some of the most horrible and expensive crises, we would all be better off if we invested more in parks and nature, in stewarding it. We might have less emergency room visits. We might have less people in jail. We might have less mental health challenges. We might have less drug addiction. We might have less a lot of the things that sort of challenge cities. But that's a generational or multi-generational bet. And too often people, whether it's politicians or communities or whatever, and they want something fixed now, right? And so that's sometimes when nature is forced to take a back seat to investments and other more pressing matters.
Yeah. Jackie, how do you think about this in your work?
I actually think that the work that we've been doing has been an opportunity to open this conversation with a community that has had to be impacted by many of these social, economic, challenges. We are talking about a city that most people think of as very prosperous and affluent, but we juxtapose that with very low-income families that have been serving this city for many, many years. They're the fabric of what makes this city so beautiful. But they could tell you, especially when we first started having these conversations, that parks were not their priority. But what this park has actually allowed us to do is
referring to India Basin,
really reframe that conversation. And not only is it a priority for them because they want healthy spaces, they want places they can take their children, they want places where elders can meander through and continue to have that connection to water in a very safe way. These are priorities for them too. It's just that they couldn't have this conversation through many of the different projects that do happen in the city with our city government. So this has been an opportunity for us to have that conversation. And it isn't always easy. Sometimes we do have very challenging pieces of the fabric of San Francisco that we can't solve all in one conversation, but it empowers people to feel like they can have that conversation. It makes people feel tangible and personable. There's a person who helps run these departments, as opposed to the government is just not here for us. So it's been a huge opportunity to open up these conversations, and then it inspires all these folks to go beyond just the park, right? So when they talk about access to this park, they know to talk to the MTA, and they know to talk to people that are providing transportation opportunities throughout the city. So it doesn't just stop with us being able to create the space. The space and having a conversation about nature really inspires people to be empowered in their lives in so many ways. And that's that restorative piece that allows people to communicate in ways that they didn't think they could before.
That's awesome. Thank you. I was going to ask a little bit later.
So
let's take a minute to celebrate the India Basin Shoreline Park. So that's the project that Jackie was referring to. And maybe, Jackie, do you want to just give a little highlight of what the park is?
Just a little highlight. It's just this little park in the southeastern side of our city. And again, when most people think of San Francisco, they think about the iconic cityscape. They don't think about across two freeways that create a huge barrier where Candlestick used to be. There's a huge community of folks that have lived in this city, generations of folks that have grown up in this city. And it's, it was an opportunity for us to renovate an existing park, but add a parcel. And throughout that, we had conversations with communities about what does it mean to have a $200 million investment come in. And this is where the great minds of Phil Ginsburg and many folks that are really starting to think about this now is designing with equity, thinking about how can we bring more equity back into communities that have suffered for so long. And we've done, I think, a fantastic job. So we were so proud to open this weekend. We had hundreds of folks out there. We had our own parents out there, and my dad was literally in tears because when I was a kid, he used to bring me out to that shoreline and just tell me to dream about the road to prosperity, and there was nothing there before. So to see it today has been amazing.
We so this is India Basin is on our southern waterfront. If you haven't been there, and for generations, it's where or generations of San Franciscans made decisions to put stuff in that neighborhood that nobody else wanted in any other neighborhood. Right? That's where we put a power plant, where we put a sewer treatment plant. The Navy came in and brought with it a lot of industry. It's an old shipbuilding site that is actually was a romantic use of the space, more so than some of the other things that came in. But the waterfront was completely cut off from the community. And we've worked over 10 years with, Victory Has Many Parents, with hundreds and hundreds of people to reopen the waterfront for community. But the gist of the project was we don't want to just sort of come in and build this great space that isn't connected to the community that lives there. But we didn't want it to be, you're all welcome, but it's a neighborhood park. It's not necessarily a destination park, even though it's worth a trip to. But so, the experiences over the lot. We opened it on Saturday, and the experiences, and it's we have soft edges, so there's a lot of habitat restoration elements to the space, a lot of history, a lot of culture, a lot of identity, but it's really about opening up the waterfront to people. And I want to just tell a couple of quick stories, which is that in a space where people never really had access to water, we've seen, young kids of color in rowboats out in India Basin. And because we've cleaned up the water and the land around it, they're in the middle of this beautiful, sort of glassy basin. It's protected from the wind. The weather is great. And you see blue herons, and you see pelicans, and you see either seals or sea otters. We can't quite figure it out. You see fish.
Seal.
Huh?
Seals.
Seals, thank you. Thank you, Rebecca.
It'd be big news if it was seal.
Okay.
Really big news.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. And watching kids touch the water has been really, really, really incredible. And we were out there today touring some people who were donors to the project around, and an elderly gentleman sort of crossed us as we were walking down to the water, and he looked up at us, had no idea who we were, but clearly the people we were touring around the neighborhood weren't from the neighborhood. And he said, "Welcome to my neighborhood." And then another woman there was a little bit of a community meeting of people from the community, and there was a facilitated question, and the question was, so what are you seeing in this space? And an elderly woman said, "Me." And it was really, really, really powerful. And this is a beautiful natural area. I mean, we are really trying our very, very, very hardest to sort of cultivate and enhance biodiversity and our natural resources, and bring nature to a community that has, frankly been, systemically deprived of it almost. So it's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing and for all the work that you've done with community.
And I'm going to go read up on the difference between seals and seals.
I'll send you some stuff. So it seems like the project that you all worked on with at India Basin and others, that these like multi-partner projects, like sharing power and bringing expertise together, is really like the future, right? There's no like single hero story anymore, right? And so I wonder, Lou, if you work in this way as well, right? Try to work in partnership and bring expertise together to do your work. If you can talk a little bit about like what needs to happen to make that happen, like the funding and the policy and the infrastructure, like how do you make this really complicated work happen?
I mean, the thing is, once they start to happen, hopefully they just start to happen all over the place. I mean, we'll have a time in the near future where we can't imagine San Francisco without an India Basin or without a tunnel tops, and they're like, we could use more of those in other places, and they hopefully inspire us to do them throughout. So what does it take? It takes inspiration, it takes vision, it takes a lot of money. And that's real, right? These projects are not inexpensive. But we can also do them on a smaller scale in these little spaces in between. There's opportunity from the big projects to the small projects, to the little things that we're doing in little neighborhoods, little gardens here and there. If everyone's participating in that, we have more that we're happy and proud for in San Francisco. Like, this is engaging people in taking care of these places. So for the big projects like Tunnel Tops and India Basin, there was a lot of planning. There's a lot of public engagement. There's a lot of bringing finances to the table, doing capital campaigns, and really having a vision for how this goes beyond just building something that's going to be for just that group of people. In the case of Tunnel Tops, that has been the case, because we wanted people to come in from the people that weren't normally coming to the Presidio. We wanted to bring people from all the different neighborhoods that weren't excited to be there, and I think we're starting to see that is a destination place. And India Basin is a special place because it's going to be that neighborhood's place, and there's all sorts of variety around, I think, what is possible there. So I think the years ahead will be interesting to see what else we can do.
Thanks, Lou. Amber, as someone who works in some of those smaller spaces and connects them to people to those spaces and connects those to each other, how do you think about this question?
About why partnerships are important.
Like what it takes.
And what it takes.
Yeah.
So one of the instigators of the Green Hair Street Corridor, Liam O'Brien, said, you have to have all of the people on the plane before the plane takes off so that you have all the people on the plane when the plane lands. And that's so true. I mean, you need to have the neighborhood associations. You need to have the neighbors, especially the neighbors. Because if you're going to go for city grants, you have to have the direct neighbors involved, because I've learned this the hard way. If you have neighbors that don't like that you're deciding you want to do something cool in their adjacent space, then your project is dead. You really have to build those big, open coalitions and really ask people what they're expecting or wanting from that space. Because you might see like a blank open wall and say, that's perfect for a nature mural by Jane Kim. And then a neighbor says, oh, no, I don't want to have all these visitations and all the car break-ins and all the things. So you really have to see where people are at before you go too far down a track. And if it takes those really powerful embedded community leaders to start projects up too. They are your best friends if you're going to be working on these small scale spaces. You really need people who are really trusted allies in the community. You can't just be an outside group, because Nature in the City doesn't, we're a citywide organization, but we're really grassroots and small. So we're not necessarily anybody's neighborhood group, but we belong to the whole city. So, and I think the other thing that we found is that we don't receive a lot of big funding. We don't receive major capital grants and things like that. So what we've done is we have cultivated donors and stewards and volunteers to care for these spaces over time, and we've kept our staff really small. So, and we depend a lot on really skilled and talented retired people in their careers, parents to come out and do this stuff. So yeah, it takes everybody, but it really takes a common vision and not a lot of haters.
So there's been a theme of coalitions and people working together, and a couple of coalitions that we wanted to talk especially about tonight were San Francisco Children and Nature. So maybe Phil could give us a little intro to what Children and Nature is. I was part of the original kind of group of worker bees working on Children and Nature, but maybe you can tell people about this amazing coalition.
San Francisco Children and Nature started about 7 years ago. San Francisco was invited to be one of the first of 7 or 8 cities around the country that participated in a new way, a little bit like Reimagining SF, of thinking about nature access for kids with the League of Cities and a national nonprofit called the Children in Nature Network. And they said, you can come, you have to bring someone from the mayor's office, someone from the, we want someone high level in the mayor's office. We want your parks director. We want someone from SFUSD, from your public school system. And we want someone from a nonprofit that works in nature. And we participated in this cohort and learned a little bit of a playbook. It's sort of a collective impact model where lots of organizations like Amber was talking about kind of contribute. And we now have 70 or 80 participating organizations, which is really quite powerful. And the thing that I'm most proud about that San Francisco Children in Nature has done, it is revitalizing or remodeling or remaking. What's the show called when your house looks like wrap and you
Makeover.
It's like a home makeover type of thing. So for preschool kids that go, you have kids that go to like daycare facilities, really young kids, and the daycare providers are often very often sort of low income or middle class folks that have opened up their home to convert it into a daycare facility, and more often than not in sort of very working class neighborhoods without a lot of nature on their street. And if you've ever tried to move, a group of 5-year-olds, we all live within a 10-minute walk of a park, unless you're 5, and then it takes a little bit longer. And if there's 25-year-olds moving at the same time, it takes exponentially longer. So we've gone in and worked with the daycare providers and kind of done a home makeover of their backyards, which are often all concrete, and turned them into these natural oases and outdoor classrooms where with lots of biodiversity, where critters and birds and bugs start to thrive, and when we have little mini orchards or community garden plots. And it has been a game changer. I think we've done about 35 of these around the city. And we're also changing the way we think about playgrounds from those big, we love our playgrounds in San Francisco, from the big plastic ones now at a space like Heron's Head or at the Academy. And we're now using natural elements. We're using logs and boulders and inviting kids to actually feel and touch and explore in nature. And it's all working.
Awesome. And a real big shout out to Maria Duarna, who's led that work, and she's amazing. One of the other coalitions that we wanted to talk about that Amber mentioned before is Reimagining San Francisco, which most of our organizations are a part of, and Jackie, you're welcome to join. Reimagining San Francisco is a coalition of about 40 organizations that were convened by the Academy to come together to think about how we can leverage all of the great work we're doing together and think about connecting it so we can build a San Francisco where people and nature thrive together. So we know that all this work is going on and people are leaders in this space, but if we really focus and find the places that just need an extra partner or a little bit more coordination, how can we really work together to push the needle, push those things forward? And that's for bigger projects, but then also thinking about how can we coordinate these smaller things that we're doing to try to have a greater impact. And it's been really, really exciting. And Lou or Amber, I don't know if you want to add anything about reimagining from your perspective.
I have a little thing to say about 40 groups, 40 groups with mission aligned. What's up with that? So some people can think Nature in the City and Sutro Stewards and Alamany Farm and Garden for the Environment and all the others. I'm not mentioning all those that are in the coalition, but the sense that, there's just too many, it's too complicated, the field is too confusing. How do I find out where to volunteer or give my money? But I think what's really cool about these specialized, really heartful groups and all of the work that they're carrying forward through their work is that there's a lot of diversity, and there's a lot of diverse places and ways of working, and we're mostly siloed because there's not a lot of time when you're working really hard in communities to do great work together. So I think that even getting us in a room, even if it's once a year, it brings forward these ideas of this talk is a result of reimagining San Francisco and many other opportunities. So even if it's slow and steady for those motors to turn, eventually small things happen, big things happen, and then hopefully it all it does all add up. Yeah, as you've seen from the wonderful examples that people are sharing, it all adds up.
All right, so we've talked about a lot of different projects that have happened and some ideas for little things. I wonder if there are things that you are especially excited about, ideas on the horizon or things that you've been thinking about. There's a lot of talk, we're here kind of almost downtown, thinking about nature in downtown or other things that are really exciting for you on the horizon. And maybe, I don't know who wants to start, maybe Lou.
I'll tell you about a project we want to do in the Presidio that we are in the planning process for. And so Presidio has had a 30-year process to restore as much wildland as possible. And since that's happened, we've now started to set our eyes on the things that can't come back on their own. So we've had a great success of bringing butterflies back. We've brought the western pond turtle back to Mountain Lake. We have frogs back. And an iconic species that we think can return to Presidio and then other parts of the city, hopefully, is California quail. Wouldn't it be cool to have California quail running all over the Presidio and other parts of town? And that just having those things back in our life is something that I'm excited about and hoping to start working on this year.
That's great.
It's awesome. Jackie?
Oh my gosh, I have so many things that I'm excited about for India Basin Shoreline Park, and just all of the organizations that we have brought in. So you talk about partnerships. It's so important to integrate the partnerships of all the things and people that have been doing really great work that are already existing in these communities. Sometimes we find that big projects, especially, people got grand ideas, but they're not necessarily in response to what communities' needs are. And creating that coalition of folks that can continue to talk about the history, but also look forward to what the future could bring is what I think is so important about all these spaces. And I'm looking forward to the programming that's going to happen out there. For anyone that hasn't seen that space and does come to that space, I not only want them to love it, but I want them to love Bayview for what Bayview is. And I think that's very, very special and meaningful to many of the folks that have grown up in the neighborhood, because it changes the whole narrative of what we've been used to hearing.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. Phil?
Well, to follow up on Jackie's comments about India Basin, lest everybody, I mean, we celebrated the opening of a phase. This is 1.7 miles in total of continuous waterfront that we have the opportunity to return to the community. And so we opened up a phase. And so there's a second phase that starts construction early next year that'll take about 2.5 years. And then there is yet a third phase to the south of 900 Innes. There is a fourth phase, which is south of the third phase. And then there is potentially a fifth phase, which is where the old power plant used to be, in between Heron's Head and India Basin Shoreline Park. So this could be a generation worth of work. And then if you go a little further south, you've got our only state park in San Francisco, Candlestick State Park, which has already is a tremendous place, but could be so much more. And then moving around the city, Buchanan Mall is one to keep our eyes open about, which is, you talk about bringing nature to the city, and you know, this is our Western Addition neighborhood, and this is a neighborhood that really, just like the Bayview in many respects, and you know, you can make the argument that this is a community that has been deprived of nature in certain ways, and we are about to begin a rather, with the Western Addition community, a rather transformative renovation of about 4 blocks. 4 blocks or 5 blocks of? Five. And we're about to renew Portsmouth Square in Chinatown. We're about to build a bunch of nature-based playgrounds in the Tenderloin. You've probably heard a little bit about the opportunity to think differently about Embarcadero Plaza. That is sort of underway. I see the executive director of the Gardens of Golden Gate Park here, so I'm going to make a big plug for what is quickly becoming the Gardens of Golden Gate Park is our botanical garden, our tea garden, and our conservatory of flowers. And when you think of them, the 3 of them as one, all of a sudden our gardens are on the map as one of the most important sort of horticultural institutions in the country. And I know Stephanie is very focused on continuing to develop a children's garden out there, which has me super excited. I'm very proud of all that the city has done around its waterfront, right? When you think about the way, you know, in Robert Moses type cities, that, you know, freeways and highways were built all along the water. And this city is getting it right. We're opening up the waterfront, all of it, to everyone. And, you know, when you think about, Lou, what the city could be like in 2050. And I love the two crosstown the double cross. Oh, okay. And if we just focused on those two trails, those interstitial moments, but in 2050, you know, in 2030, 2040, we could have a waterfront that is entirely open to the people that live here. And I think that's a pretty awesome vision.
Yeah, it's an amazing vision. Amber, is there anything that we can applaud that vision?
Well, some of you know, but not everyone would know, but Nature in the City has been involved with BART and Muni for years to try and build living roofs on top of the canopy structures along Market Street. So there are 23 of these beautiful canopies that were built to sustain living roofs, and they cover the escalators, they close at night. There, you know, Market Street in the past 5 years has gone through major divestment and companies moving out. So our project hasn't come to fruition because we're seeking sponsorship and we're seeking grants, and it's a large investment to install living roofs on top of these canopies. But I really don't want to see them in 2050 empty and devoid of plants. I think that we'll definitely get some plants up there as we keep that vision alive. Yeah.
Awesome.
And the rest of Market Street and downtown. You know, there's so many murals and planters and plazas, rooftops, and the publicly owned private spaces, the Popos. There's so much going on downtown, and Salesforce Park and Sue Bierman Park and Yerba Buena Park. So we have a lot going on downtown that we can build on and see what comes next.
Awesome. That leads very well into like our first question from the audience. So this question is about privately owned public open spaces, or POPOs. So maybe someone can define those a little bit so not everyone maybe knows those. They feel like one of downtown's best kept secrets. How can they be maximized and amplified? And I think, Amber, you talked a little bit about, you know, thinking about all these downtown spaces and how they could be connected or celebrated or more known. But maybe if someone wants to talk about POPOs.
I think this is I can try to take a stab at this because this is a bit of a wonky city planning concept. So, so when there is development, there is usually a requirement for development of a certain size to contribute to the open space network in San Francisco and contribute to housing and a lot of other, you know, very sort of important goals to make our city more livable. But the theory is if you're going to contribute to making our city more dense, you should also be contributing to providing, you know, more open space or recreation. And so a POPO is a privately owned public open space. That's what the acronym stands for. And I'm glad that whoever submitted that question thinks that they're all really wonderful. I don't. I think too many of them are sort of marble, you know, coffee plazas that enhance the value of the commercial building in which they sit on a mezzanine, but actually don't do very much to contribute to the open space network in our city. And I think the city is starting to have conversations about really using these spaces to further its open space goals in a little bit more of a way than it's been doing. There are some that are certainly fabulous, so I don't want to knock them all. But I think whether it's to promote nature or even to promote active recreation, or, you know, in a space that is deficient of a pickleball court, for example, or a dog play area or whatever, these things also matter to people living in cities for our health and well-being.
It also seems like for the POPOs, they might not be the most accessible right? For someone who's not comfortable like walking up to a big fancy building and being like, I'm here for the popo on the 8th floor. So like how do we think about those kind of spaces? Jackie, maybe you want to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I feel like when I talk to a lot of young folks that meander downtown and navigate the spaces through the downtown area, they don't even see these spaces. They don't even know they exist. And it wasn't until maybe when the Salesforce Tower was being built and then there's the park outside of that, that people started to think about these spaces even being available. But I think I share how you feel about them, Phil, is while they're a good concept, they don't necessarily serve folks as a park would. And so it's interesting because I don't know if a lot of the young people that I work with necessarily feel comfortable doing exactly what you said, going to some high rise and getting to the 8th, 20th, 50th floor and just saying, hey, I just want to see the park. So I think we really need to think about creative ways that invite people in, that make them accessible and make them feel like a piece of home or San Francisco, that you can go anywhere in these very public spaces. But, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity for work there.
I'd rather see a commercial developer support, you know, these little interstitial spaces that you're talking about, Rebecca, or the crosstown trails, or support some program at India Basin or San Francisco Children in Nature. If you're creating a community space in what is essentially a private building, you're doing that for the people that primarily work in that building. And it's probably a good thing to do because it makes the building, you know, more welcoming for the people that might rent your spaces. I don't know that, for me, I don't know that that necessarily satisfies the need for community open space.
So here's a similar question. So we think about these other spaces. So this question is about parklets. So maybe I'll go to Amber for this one. So are there plans for nature-based parklets? And are there viable ways for small but mighty green spaces? Are these a viable way to build a green space?
Well, I know maintenance is a big deal. I think that a lot of reasons why people don't make gardens in the parklets is because they're really built for commerce. And if they are putting planters in, sometimes that's the last thing that people want to deal with in these spaces. And groups like ours, that's our specialty, but we're not going to come in there and just, you know, care for something over the years that, you know, somebody's just going to take out and they're kind of temporary. So it's challenging on that level. But then on another level, I've been part of Parking Day experiences, pop-ups that are so much fun, where you bring all the plants and you put them in the space and then you have bees and butterflies on them, you know, and you're seeing all this dynamic life, you know, come up before your eyes just because you're putting something out in the sun for the day. So it would be really nice to see more of that, but I think that that's why you need nonprofits. That's why you need the Rec and Park Department. That's why you need Presidio Trust, because these people are specializing in spaces for people and nature to thrive together. They're not set up like, you know, as extra seating or, you know, and I love the idea of taking back parking spaces. I think that's really cool. But yeah, I mean, I would love to talk to any of the business owners or residents that was like, I just want to build a nature park out in front of my storefront. Like, yes, let's do it. And I think a lot of the sidewalk gardens were like that. Like, people had that generous impulse to, I'm going to plant more trees. I'm going to plant more plants out in the sidewalk space and relieve the burdens on the combined sewer system and all of that. I think that's probably more where people are planting gardens because they really care about gardens.
Yeah, does anyone else have any thoughts about?
I'd say that speaks to all of the ambitions that we have, is that we have to care for them in the long term. And why is it easier to get $200 million to build a place than it is to get $200 million to take care of something in perpetuity for a very long time? For whatever reason, we want the shiny thing right now, but we often fail to take care of the thing that we've just put in. So I think that's one of our biggest tasks, is how do we sustain these incredible investments and to the long term, because they do wear and tear and we lose interest in them, and so we have to ensure that we have this culture of stewardship that can carry them through.
Awesome. Okay, we have a couple more questions. This one is from a student. So what new understandings about restoring equity were gained through the India Basin Project, and what gaps exist for future projects to address? Small question.
Well, I'll answer that question by addressing something that Lou said about how do you sort of make sure that you can care for and sustain a place. And I think that one really important strategy about caring and stewarding a place after the ribbon cutting is to make sure that the community that the place is intended to serve feels truly connected to the space, and that people see themselves in the space. And I think that we're only on day 3, but we're very optimistic about our ability to steward this space, because there is already clearly so much love within the neighborhood for this space and for caring for it. What I think we learned, and then I'll turn it over to Jackie, but what I learned, and it actually goes to what was the airplane quote?
Liam's airplane.
Airplane quote, which is really a very poignant way of expressing, another maxim, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And and so, with relying on Jackie's wisdom, we really slowed the planning process down considerably. And frankly, in many respects, at least, I had to step back and allow Jackie to kind of step up on this project, and let our community leaders really step up and tell us what they needed. And this project actually had a little bit of a unique trick, because we are coming in with a lot of investment in a neighborhood that doesn't always get it. How do you ensure that investment doesn't destabilize the community, right, through gentrification and displacement? And that was really sort of the academic sort of principle that we were trying to kind of address. And I think when people see themselves in a space, it works. When you don't see yourself in the space, it's going to work not as well.
Well, we might be 3 days in with an open park, but we've had over 7 years actually working with community.
That's very true.
So this, again, was an opportunity to have a conversation with a community that didn't always feel at the table when these decisions were being made for them. So it has been a huge transition for even the community to be able to experience having conversations with government. And it has been so, I think, enriching for the entire project. And there's so many examples of how we looked at this park project as an equitable park project. Yes, there's a vision, and there's some really innovative thinking of what the park could potentially be. But we had to work with folks that were able to translate what our community said they wanted and needed and were starving for so long into creating that vision and creating the reality that we see today. Over the course of those 7 years, we had to touch on subjects that were way beyond what our parks normally talk about. And one of the most difficult ones was affordability in the housing crisis, because to invest this much money in a neighborhood that, as I was saying, feels so starved of resources in a park, it's very difficult to understand what impact that would have other than pushing people out. And that was very scary for a lot of people in the very beginning. So we had an opportunity to have these complex conversations that provided feedback and kind of got all kind of ideas spinning in so many different directions. So for us, we pushed the envelope with every contractor, with every firm, with every organization that we worked with to find out what they could contribute back to the community. And ways that we were able to actually move the needle is with our fundraising team that also helped with tunnel tops. In the very beginning, we said, hey, what kind of opportunities can you offer this community that go beyond just the fundraising piece? And not only did they provide an entire bank of hours for supporting nonprofits to help kind of on the back end stuff, because again, there's a lot of really great organizations that are already doing great work, but they haven't had the long years of building out what their organization should be. It's really pushed together, like pieced together on shoestring budgets, and they're making it work. But the other thing was inviting a young person from the community to actually work with the firm. And it started off as a summer internship, turned into a 3-year internship, and he is now working with the San Francisco Recreation and Parks Department. And to come home and share with your parents and your siblings that you just secured another $150,000 for your community, for your park, is a huge, compelling story for so many people that are contributing, that are interested in looking at what we're doing, and have really dove into what we've done in order to create this equitable project. It's not just building a space. And I know when I first talked to Phil about, yeah, y'all could build this space and people will come, but they may not necessarily reflect this community. To see it now, 3 days in, to see folks that are really taking ownership of this space is amazing, because it just opens up more conversations about how cities can get better. And we've been on some tours nationwide, and even folks have been learning about our project from outside of our country, because it's now a leading practice for cities that haven't done this before. But every large city we know have pockets of communities that are doing all the work to keep the city running, but not necessarily benefiting from all of what the city has, right? So this is, I think the most important thing is figuring out how to create that compelling story with such history fixed into it and so many different voices, but coming out with this collective voice that says, this is what we want, this is what we need, and being a reality today is only inspiring us to go even further.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's so great to hear all the components of the story. So we have just a couple minutes left. Maybe everyone, if you want to take a quick second to think about, like, when people leave here, what's something that they can do to help further nature, bring more nature into our lives in the city, or like one tiny little thing that they can do.
Spend 30 minutes a day outside, every day.
Nice. Good one.
I say greet your neighbor. Greet the people that you come across in some of these spaces, even if it's just a smile, to gesture that, you know, you're happy, you're welcoming. But there's, I think, a magic that happens when you make those connections, especially in those spaces, that we become a community by getting to know each other. So that breaks down some of those walls. So get to know people, say hello every once in a while, or even just give a smile to let people know that, you know, you're enjoying this space too.
Nice.
I'd say go to a new place that you haven't been before. The feeling that I've lived in San Francisco for 30 years and there's still places I've never been. And I'm like, what? I couldn't believe that's here. And those things inspire us and make us feel connected to these places. So,
yeah, Amber.
Awesome. I would say pick a local nonprofit to give an end of the year gift to.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be Nature in the City. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, we survive and thrive because of generosity and giving, the small nonprofits and contracts with the city and other great gifts. But I think that we need people to be involved with, if you can't do things like coming out and growing plants or pulling weeds, and you can give, that's awesome.
Awesome. So I think, like, to sum up, it's like, go outside, maybe to a new place, and smile and be friendly. I'll add pay attention, right? Not just be outside, but pay attention to the nature around you, and support the little guy. Support the people doing the work.
Yeah.
Right?
I'll add one more. Volunteer.
Volunteer.
There are so many opportunities to connect with all of us doing this work and participating. You learn about what the nature is, you meet your community, and you get good food. They're all
Usually good food.
Awesome. Well, that's all we have time for tonight. Jackie, Phil, Amber, Lou, thanks so much for being with us. And thanks also to the audience in person and online for making time to be a part of this conversation. We hope you get out and take some of this advice and get out while the weather is so beautiful right now, like perfect, to take part and be a part of your parks and natural spaces and help build the community, and think about how you can support communities wherever you live in those green spaces. If you'd like to engage in future programs or support the Commonwealth Club World Affairs, please visit their website at commonwealthclub.org, where you can register for future programs, catch up on programs you missed, or become a member. So thank you so much for joining us, and let's give a round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you.